The next movie I'm discussing is History of Sound, which is a period romance drama. It stars Paul Mescal and Josh O'Connor. And I've been saying this repeatedly. I'm going to say it again. Josh O'Connor is working overtime. Rent is overdue. This guy's working very, very hard this
Who
year.
does who does that man earn money?
He owes somebody a lot of money. And let me tell you something. In this one, he's working hard for it. He basically carries the
Oh,
movie. So let me get into it. Essentially, the story revolves around two men, Leonor, who's played by Paul Mescal, and he's basically a simple small town farm boy with an inherent musical gift. He's a good singer. And then we also have David, who's played by Josh O'Connor, and he's a privileged academic musicologist. He's a very cynical, worldly, but also manipulative man, and also very, very charming. And Josh O'Connor plays the charming role very, very well. So the pair meet in 1917 in the New England Conservatory, and it's a really nice scene actually where David is playing the piano, and then Leona walks up to him, and they have this conversation about music, and they start playing and singing together, and it's really nice. And long story short, they end up hooking up that night. And so we start to see these two men getting closer to each other, and eventually David gets conscripted, so he has to go to fight in World War I. And the film does this really jarring like jump forward where he just goes to war and comes back, and he's exactly the same basically. But he's really excited to see Leona again, and they plan to go on this really long, extravagant trip across America where they're going to be using a piece of technology called a graphophone. So basically, it's a very, very, very old school recording system. It's got like a speakerphone element to it, and you record sounds using wax cylinders. Anyway, so they then go on this really long trip, and it's just a classic love story where they're literally hiking through the winter in Maine, and they're going to meet all of these different communities in America, which I found fascinating. We really do get like a real snapshot of what it was like to be an American in different areas at the time. And long story short, they're recording different folk songs, and it's just a really nice commentary on how we should record pieces of history and culture. Anyway, so the two fall in love. They're, obsessed with each other. They're having sex in secret and all that stuff. Although we never get a proper sex scene between these two. And I think that's important. I'll come back to
I've heard Paul Mescal talking about
it.
that.
And long story short, towards the end of the trip, we see David become increasingly irritable and distant from Lionel. And, we all knew it was coming, but it's just like, okay, what's going on with him? Why is he behaving like this? Leona asks David if he would like to do this again sometime, and David just says sure, basically. And then he says something along the lines of, "You need to go and explore the world. You shouldn't be this small town boy anymore. You've got a gift. Go and travel." And then Leona never hears from David again, basically.
Did you say queer?
Literally, this movie is quite tropey. That's one of my pieces of feedback. Anyway, so then we see Lionel. He takes David's advice basically, and he travels the world. He goes to Italy. He goes to Oxford to go and be a music professor, just like his lover. And while he's in Oxford, he meets a very high society, upper class English woman, and she's supposed to be the ideal bride, basically. And they have a very passionate sex scene at this point, which is
Oh,
interesting. Yeah, so we have no sex scenes with the real love story, and then with this woman who's obviously a beard, or like just a placeholder. They have a very passionate sex scene, which I found to be jarring. She starts to make commentaries about how they should get married, and oh, my parents really like you. And we immediately see Leonor really reject that, and he's not interested anymore. And ultimately, he starts to think about his relationship with David, and he starts to miss him. And he just turns around and says to her, it's not going to work. I'm going back to America. His mom dies when he gets back to America. There's all sorts of things going on, and it's all a bit chaotic. And then basically, when he gets back to the United States, his entire small boy farm town life is thrown upside down. And so he goes to try and find David again, and he finds out that David was married the whole time.
oh,
But again, this is a trope, right? Like we all knew it was coming. He finds David's wife; she's now remarried, and he basically says to her, "Look, David and I took this trip, and we had this graphophone thing. If you find it, let me know," because they had all of those recordings they had taken together, and he wanted to process them. And she says she'll see if she can find it. And then at that point, we find out that David has also died as well.
oh.
Yeah, so I will say, as much as I didn't care for Paul Mescal's performance in this, that scene where we see him completely shattered, because obviously he thought he was going to go back and find the love of his life, and not only did he find out that David was a liar, he found out that he's now passed away.
Is he older here? Is like, do they do aging makeup, or is a relatively short amount of time that has passed?
Yeah, I think it's only like maybe 5 or 6 years that have passed.
Okay.
But there is an aging thing that happens towards the end, and this is how the movie wraps up. We skip forwards a long period of time, and we see a much older Leonor. He's played by Raphael Sparge. We see older Leonor receive a package from someone who purchased the house that David and his wife lived in. And obviously, the package contains the graphophone with the wax cylinders. And he finds one that was from David to him. And it's basically David confessing that, look, I had to ghost you. And he does care for him. And we just see older Leonor completely break down. And that's how the movie wraps up.
There's an interesting pattern I'm noticing with these films,
Right?
but go on. Yeah.
Right? Now, look, this movie has not received the best reviews. I do have my issues with it, but I will say I didn't hate it. I wasn't completely bored. I did have pacing issues though. Now
How
bear in
long
mind I
is
watched
it?
this. Oh, it's like I think it's over 2 hours.
Oh, of
It
course.
is a long movie, but I think the reason why it was able to hold me is because in the beginning I was somewhat invested in the love story despite the lack of passion. And the reason why is because I assumed it was coming from Leonor's character being somewhat awkward. So I assumed that the frigidness here was coming from him. But then when we got the sex scene with in Oxford, I was like, well, it's clearly not that. So that did annoy me. Aside from that, we get very little exploration into David's character, which is again another theme that we'll be talking about, I guess, with other films, queer films from this film festival. I didn't like the way how David's character basically goes to war, and when he comes back, there's no exploration of how that war changed him, and I just didn't find that believable at all. I thought the accents were okay. Now, bear in mind, these two men are, I think one is British, one is Irish. And, of course, I'm going to think their American accent is okay. I would leave that to the Americans to decide whether it was actually good or not.
It's very interesting that they called Paul Mescal to come and do an American accent, and they called Josh O'Connor. I trust he can do it. He did it well in
Mm.
Knives Out, but Paul Mescal,
It wasn't too bad. Now, what I will say is, I didn't find Paul Mescal convincing in Hamnet, someone who's playing a period character. But in this, I did find him fairly convincing. He didn't look contemporary, and I didn't think his acting was terrible in this. I was more convinced about him as a lover in this than I was in Hamnet. But I just think the problem is he's up against Josh O'Connor, who just completely carries the movie. So it was, he didn't have a chance really.
Josh is a very, very serious actor. Like, he is. He just is. I've never seen him not put his all into his performance, ever. Like, he doesn't play. No matter how unserious the film is, e.g., Challengers, Josh comes to give you a serious performance. Like,
Yeah.
I have no negative criticisms of any performance I've ever seen him do. His peers don't really understand that he's not something to play with and they should step up when up against him. And many times they don't.
The worst thing is, I do believe, based on Hamlet, that Mescal stepped up. It just wasn't enough. So if I had to wrap this up, if I overall, I think it was a good movie. I wasn't bored. I did have pacing issues though, and so for that reason, I would give it a 5 out of 10 overall. I do think no, it's a five out of ten.
I thought you liked it more than a five, the way you were describing it, because you kind of convinced me about it, and I wasn't that excited about it before.
If it wasn't for the sex scene with Paul Mescal in Oxford, I would have been like, okay, you know what, this is a 6. But the juxtaposition of it just didn't work for me. But I wonder if we had two openly queer men playing these roles. I wonder if we would have seen a bit more from that love story.
I will say that Paul Mescal was in All of Us Strangers, which was a 2023 film that does centered love story between two men. And if I'm not mistaken, that movie had straightforward gay sex scenes.
Okay.
So I don't think it's something that he inherently shies away from. I have heard him speaking in the news about the production of this film and him saying, oh, that for this particular film, the whole point of it is supposed to be not about just explicit sex for the sake of it, and the director opted for sexually tense moments and romance over graphic depiction. But like you said, but then up
Why
and
is
out
there
of
a
that when it came to
heterosexual?
the
Do you understand?
heterosexual sex scene. So yeah,
Also,
reminds me of Call Me by Your Name had this criticism to some degree.
really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. But don't we have a quite explicit scene in
It's
that one?
it's not actually that explicit when you think about it. It's a
Okay.
long scene, but there's no actual nudity in it.
Oh, okay.
Um, but there is with the woman.
Mm.
But
One
also,
final,
to be fair, in that one, like, Timothy Chalamet was very young and he was playing a very young person, so I wouldn't want to see anything
yeah,
too
yeah.
explicit anyway.
Another movie we're going to be discussing shortly, Pillion. Pillion is very graphic, but the sex has a purpose. So I don't. I think it's kind of a cop out to say that. If anything, the vibe I was going with in the beginning when I liked the film quite strongly is that I assumed it was an exploration of the emotional elements of a gay romantic relationship instead of the sexual elements. But then they just completely breathe out of the water. So yeah, overall, I would say a 5 out of 10. Good, mid to good. I recommend it. I wouldn't. I wasn't bored.
I'll watch it when I get the chance. I'm interested in it, and I really like Josh O'Connor as an actor. Does it pass the Bechdel test?
Right. So I think it does. Now, to be fair, one thing worth pointing out, this movie doesn't care about women, and it's not about women. To be fair, it's not really
I
about.
feel like at this point you should have a whole segment called "This Movie Does Not Care About Women" because you say that every other episode.
It doesn't care about women, but we do see women speaking to each other. For example, when they're going across America and they're doing that whole kind of archival process, there are women speaking to each other. And also when we get to Oxford and he meets the young high class woman, she speaks to her mom. So it does pass, but there's nothing in this movie really to talk about gender.